So this happened.
Ruby and Kevin Franke hired licensed professional counselor Jodi Hildebrandt to provide mental health therapy to their family upon the recommendation of the Mormon Church. Hildebrandt entered into the Frankes' personal lives, attending their family functions, outings, and looking after their children. Kevin Franke moved out of their family home and had little to no contact with his wife and children for over a year, as Hildebrandt told him to do. Jodi Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke became business partners in a so-called therapeutic venture named Connections. Ruby Franke and her children moved into Jodi Hildebrandt's sprawling ranch house with the therapist. The Franke children were isolated, tortured, and physically, mentally, and spiritually abused by the two women. They now live behind bars, convicted of heinous acts of violence towards the Franke children. From the very beginning, these relationships should never have been forged.
Like a lot of you, I've been following the Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt case with shock, sadness, and some degree of powerlessness. I've been horrified at the abuse the children endured and amazed at their strength, their love, and their downright heroic actions. It's been on my mind so much, I realized I want to help in the really small way that I can. Part of the pain I myself have experienced in following the story is that it hits a little too close to home. Hildebrandt is about my age and had a similar license to mine, and I have found myself yelling at my screen far too much to ignore this. So let's talk about how to avoid getting into a toxic relationship with a therapist, because the worst of the in the Ruby Franke and the Jodi Hildebrandt case would most likely have been avoided if that relationship would have never happened in the first place. It astounded me that this very open dual relationship between therapist and client was going on for so long. And a dual relationship, by the way, is when the mental health counselor enters into any other kind of relationship with the client besides the therapeutic one. It is highly unethical for a therapist to enter into any kind of relationship with a current or past client. The only relationship that should ever be formed once a therapist enters into a therapeutic one with a client is in the counseling sessions. That means a therapist shouldn't meet with a client for dinner, adopt a cat from a client, trade Pokemon cards, accept stock tips, watch a classic movie while eating popcorn, enter into a romantic or a business relationship, or even a casual friendship with a client. Babysit their kids, nothing except what is in the best interest for the client therapeutically and only within the confines of the therapeutic session. That applies even for a client the therapist may have seen 60 years ago, as well as a current one. One of the beautiful healing things about the therapeutic relationship is that the client hopefully feels safe to share their darkest secrets with their counselor without fear of the kind of judgment they may encounter in their social lives. If that was to carry on into a different kind of relationship, the balance of power would leave the client very vulnerable. It's a very selfish thing for a therapist to pursue that kind of relationship with a client. Every thought, every question, every interaction a therapist has with the client should always be in the absolute best interest of that client. And by the way, it's up to the therapist to set those boundaries with the client. I think in this case, Hildebrandt saw a client with a lot of resources that Hildebrandt herself wanted, and threw all thoughts of helping the Franke family aside to service her own warped self-interest, and took awful advantage of her clients. Instead of gently encouraging the parents to help their children gain their own autonomy and growth, which is what any counselor worth their weight would have done, Hildebrandt capitalized on Franke's unhealthy desire to control her family because she, Hildebrandt, wanted to prove herself more powerful by taking that power away from Franke.
Allegedly.
So if a therapist ever wants to enter into any other kind of relationship with you or any other client, other than a healthy, accepted counseling relationship, run! Run for the freaking hills. Then call the therapist state licensing board, which all of us have one, and report them. which, by the way, a brave former client of Hildebrandt, Adam Paul Steed, did just that and reported Hildebrandt for having a dual relationship and disclosing confidential medical information to the Mormon Church back in 2012. Hildebrandt had her license taken away for 18 months and was given it back. Which brings me to the next thing you need to do before hiring a therapist. Call the state licensing board and see if that therapist is in active good standing and if there have been any complaints filed about them and what they were about. I encourage you to check online reviews, but honestly, those can be problematic. Anyone can leave a review. I had one agency I worked for encourage us to have friends of ours leave reviews. Also, the therapeutic process can upset some clients, even when the therapist is doing what is in the best interest of them. They can get upset and leave a review that's really not based on the therapist's actual quality of work. Not only can you call their state licensing board about complaints, you can actually interview the therapist before you meet with them. A lot of therapists offer a phone 30-minute free consultation before you decide to go in for that first counseling session with them. I'm going to suggest some possible questions for you to ask during that 30-minute consultation. How long have you been practicing? What kinds of issues do you specialize in treating? What treatment methods do you utilize? Have you ever had a complaint filed against you, and what was it about? Why did you get into counseling? What do you like most about counseling? What are your expectations of me as your possible client? Are you okay with me telling you my expectations of you as my possible therapist? Have you ever fired a client, and why? What kind of client are you not comfortable in treating, and why? The therapist is reluctant to answer any of these questions. They honestly may not be the best match for you. One of the other issues in the Frankie Hildebrandt case was that Frankie was recommended to Hildebrandt by the Mormon Church. Hildebrandt specifically represented the Mormon faith. Well, at least they thought she did. This is a problem, and let me tell you why. If you want counseling in matters of faith, go to your clergy. It's fine to want a mental health counselor who can relate to your beliefs, but they should not instruct you in matters of faith. In the same way that a member of clergy or elder in faith shouldn't diagnose your emotional or behavioral difficulties, they of course can offer great advice sometimes. A clinical therapist shouldn't instruct you in the tenets of or expectations of your faith. Trying to do so creates one of those dual relationships we talked about before. So beware of a therapist advertising that they are a religious counselor. Here's something else to watch out for. If your therapist is reinventing the wheel, they probably shouldn't drive. Here's what I mean. Psychology, despite maybe seeming subjective to the outside, is based on rigorous testing, repeated and broadly accepted principles that have been researched often for years, if not decades, by hundreds of accredited research institutions. As new information is found, the various modalities that therapists use to help their clients are tested again and again under valid, repeatable, ethical, and consistent measures. If your psychologist tells you that they have discovered and proven a new great truth about the human mind that no or few others in the field understand, there's probably a reason. And it's really not likely to be a good one. Being the test subject for a psychologist's new theories must always be at the informed consent of the client. Hildebrandt created a supposedly new counseling method using her own buzzwords like distortions and connections. A quick Google search would show that this was not an accepted therapeutic intervention. So your therapist should be able to point to tested modalities in their techniques. It was a major red flag that, in this case, Hildebrandt saw a certain kind of addiction in just about every client. She used the fear that the devil was taking over her client's family to get more and more money from them and gain more power over them. A diagnosis should be based in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the DSM, and symptoms always show in a pattern over a period of time. not 1 or 2 times. Hildebrandt saw addiction when clients had seen 2 hours in their lifetime of adult entertainment. That doesn't fit any definition of diagnoses. Also, for a proper diagnosis, symptoms have to show a negative effect in a pattern over time. So, are you calling into work to stay home and watch this content for gratification every month? Are you missing your kid's baseball game, family barbecues, or dates with your spouse? A mental health professional has to justify all diagnoses per the DSM, keep accurate and up-to-date records. And by the way, you can see those records that pertain to you for free anytime. Which brings us to the next issue in the Hildebrandt Franke case, and that is isolation is not healing. If your counselor tries to isolate you, that's a bad sign. Good therapist is an important part of the journey to good mental and emotional health. They are, however, as any good therapist will tell you, only a part of that journey. Encouraging a client to get advice from others, friends, family, clergy, lawyers, police, the internet is standard practice in any therapeutic relationship. If your therapist demands or encourages you to take their advice without questioning, then that is not a good therapeutic relationship. When Hildebrandt required that Kevin Franke leave and drop all contact with his wife and children for over a year, that was classic isolation tactics, which have been used by abusers and tyrants since time immemorial. This allows the individual or group that have been isolated to be more easily controlled by removing dissenting voices, stripping away potential support, and creating a habit of obedience. While a counselor might advise a period of separation in certain situations, this is rarely anywhere close to absolute, except in cases of domestic violence. And frankly, even in some of those cases, there are supervised visitations. Be very wary of therapists trying to keep children away from their parents. Now, let's talk about group therapy. Group therapy is incredibly useful. Many clients have benefited from talking to and listening to other clients who are confronting some of the same challenges that they are. It can be an amazing, liberating, and validating experience. However, no therapist should mandate group therapy to a client, especially one that the therapists themselves are running. They can recommend. They can even strongly recommend. They can even offer a group session that they run, although they should also offer other available groups if one is available. They should never mandate anything. If the client isn't ready for group therapy, then they just aren't. Demanding the client do anything is a way of disenfranchising and controlling the client. And by the way, isn't healthy because the client needs to take that power, needs to learn how to make their own decisions. In this particular case, Hildebrandt broke multiple ethical rules by mandating that her clients go to a group that she was running, further isolating them and costing them a lot of money too. So, to recap, no dual relationships. Call the state licensing board and do a pre-consult. Be wary of counselors claiming to be religious therapists. Be wary of treatments that the counselor has supposedly come up with on their own and insists you use them without informed consent. Isolation is not healing. No mandates, darling. Referrals to other mental health providers are an active and healthy part of the therapeutic community. I refer people, possible clients, to therapists that are my colleagues that I trust all the time. Researching and writing this script has honestly been really healing for me. I really hope that this is helpful for you and that you find a therapist that's a really healthy and good match for you. I also very sincerely hope that all of the Franke children come to see themselves as the truly amazing people that they are. Remember, be your own safe place.
And don't throw a hissy fit.